When I was 9 years old, my own mother looked me in the eyes, handed me a duffel bag filled with my clothes, and told me I wasn't welcome in her house anymore. For 19 years, I believed she simply stopped loving me. Then one unexpected phone call destroyed everything I thought I knew. Stick with me while I share my story. And if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Sloan Whitfield, and this is the story I never thought I would tell. I grew up in a small town on the coast. When I was little, life felt safe. My mom, Adele Whitfield, wasn't the kind of mother who laughed all the time, but I always knew she cared about me. She worked hard, came home exhausted, and still made time to braid my hair or read beside me at night. Everything changed after my dad passed away. Losing him broke me, but it also changed my mother. She became quiet, distant, and harder to reach. A year later, she married a man named Garrick. He moved into our house with his daughter, Vesper. At first, I wanted us to be a family. I tried to be kind to both of them. I helped around the house, stayed out of trouble, and did everything I could to make life easier. But no matter what I did, Garrick always found something wrong with me. If a dish shattered, it was somehow my fault. If Vesper got into trouble, he blamed me. He spoke gently whenever my mother was around, making himself look patient and caring. The moment she left the room, his warmth disappeared. Day after day, he murmured things about me to my mother. I could never catch every word, but I knew he was turning her against me. Slowly, she stopped talking to me. She stopped asking about school. She stopped tucking me in at night. Every time she looked at me, it felt like she was looking at a stranger instead of her daughter. I kept hoping things would get better. I believed if I behaved perfectly, my mother would remember who I was. Instead, everything fell apart. One cold evening, my mother called me into the kitchen. A gray duffel bag sat on the table. Inside were a few shirts, jeans, my old boots, and the only photo I had of my dad. Without looking away, she told me to take it and go. I stood there frozen, waiting for her to say it was a mistake. She never did. I walked out of the house carrying everything I owned in one bag, believing my mother had chosen her new family over me. That night, my elderly Uncle Reeve Marlowe opened his door, hugged me without asking questions, and gave me a place to sleep. From that moment on, my old life was over. Life with Uncle Reeve was nothing like the life I had before, but it was filled with something I hadn't felt in a long time. Kindness. His little house was old and needed repairs. The pipes rattled in winter and the porch step had rotted through. Money was always tight. He worked 2 jobs, stocking shelves before dawn and driving a delivery route in the evenings. He came home tired every night, yet he still asked me how school had gone and made sure I had something warm to eat. Watching him work so hard made me promise myself that I would never waste the chance he had given me. Even though he treated me with love, I couldn't forget what had happened. Deep inside, I felt like I could be left behind again at any moment. I stopped asking people for help. I stopped expecting anyone to stay. If something needed to be done, I learned to do it myself. That became my way of surviving. School slowly became the only place where my mind felt peaceful. When I sat in a classroom, I didn't have to think about the past. I buried myself in books, finished every assignment early, and stayed after class whenever teachers offered extra work. Learning gave me something nobody could take away from me. My teachers noticed how hard I worked and encouraged me to dream bigger than our small town. I listened, but I never told them the real reason I pushed myself so hard. Every year when my birthday came around, a small part of me waited for the phone to ring. I imagined hearing my mother's voice, even if it was only for a few seconds. I hoped she would say she was sorry or ask if I was okay. The call never came. By the end of each birthday, I quietly accepted that another year had passed without her thinking about me. After a while, the sadness turned into determination. I stopped wishing she would come back. Instead, I decided that one day she would see what she had thrown away. I told myself that the best revenge wasn't yelling or crying. It was building a life so successful that she would regret her decision every time she thought of me. That thought kept me moving forward whenever life became difficult. My hard work paid off during my final year of high school. I earned several scholarships that covered my college education. The day the acceptance letters arrived, Uncle Reeve cried harder than I had ever seen. He said he had always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. Leaving for college felt like the start of a new chapter, but I carried more than clothes in my suitcase. I carried years of hurt, unanswered questions, and a wound that success could not heal. No matter how far I traveled, the little girl who had been sent away at 9 never truly disappeared. College changed many things for me. I discovered that I had a talent for finding patterns hidden inside legal cases. While other students found contract law tedious, I enjoyed untangling complicated disputes. One professor encouraged me to study fraud litigation because it combined investigation with law. I followed that advice, and after graduation, I found work with a respected firm. Over the years, I earned a reputation for being thorough, patient, and impossible to mislead. Clients trusted me because I never let a detail slip past. My career continued to grow, and I was finally able to give myself the kind of life I had once believed was impossible. I bought my first home, a quiet place with a small side garden and a porch where I could sit after work. It wasn't a huge house, but every payment came from my own hard work. Walking through the front door each evening reminded me that nobody could take this life away from me. Even though my career was successful, my personal life looked very different. I kept people at a distance. Friends invited me to parties and family gatherings, but I usually found reasons not to go. A few kind people tried to get close to me over the years, yet I always pulled away before the relationship became serious. Trust never came easily. Somewhere inside me, I believed that if my own mother could stop loving me, anyone else could leave too. Work became my safe place because case files never lied and never betrayed me. One afternoon, while I was finishing a brief, I received an unexpected phone call from someone back in my hometown. The caller quietly told me that my mother was seriously ill. For a few seconds, I didn't know what to say. Then I thanked the caller and ended the conversation. I set my phone on the desk and went back to work as if nothing had happened. I convinced myself that she had made her choice years ago. If she was alone now, that was the life she had created. I refused to feel guilty for staying away. A few weeks later, another call came. This time, it carried different news. My mother had passed away. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time, waiting to feel something. Anger, relief, sadness, anything. Instead, there was only silence. It felt strange knowing that the woman I had spent so many years blaming was gone forever. A few days after, a small package arrived at my office. Inside was a sealed envelope with my name written across the front in handwriting I recognized immediately. It belonged to Adele Whitfield. My hands froze as I looked at it. After 19 years without hearing a single word from her, she had somehow found one last way to reach me. I had no idea whether opening that envelope would finally bring me peace or tear open every wound I had spent my life trying to hide. For 2 days, I left the sealed envelope sitting on my kitchen counter. Every time I walked past it, I looked away. Part of me wanted to burn it without reading a single word. Another part wanted answers that I had waited most of my life to hear. On the third evening, I finally picked it up. My hands shook as I carefully opened it and unfolded the pages inside. The first sentence stopped me cold. My mother wrote that she was sorry. She said there were no words strong enough to repair the damage she had caused. As I kept reading, she admitted that sending me away was the biggest mistake of her life. Then I reached the sentence that made no sense at all. She wrote that she had never stopped loving me. Not for one single day. I stared at those words, reading them again and again. They felt impossible. If she had loved me, why had she let me leave? Why had she stayed silent for so many years? My anger returned immediately. I almost laughed because it sounded like an excuse from someone who no longer had to face the consequences. I wanted to tear the letter into pieces. Before I could, I noticed one final request near the bottom of the page. My mother begged me not to judge her until I visited a certain storage facility. She included the address, the number of a storage unit, and a key that had been attached to the letter with clear tape. She wrote that everything I needed to know was waiting there. She ended by saying that if I wanted the truth, I had to see it with my own eyes. I sat alone in my kitchen for a long time. Staring at the small key resting in my hand, I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself nothing inside that unit could change what had happened. I even carried the letter to the trash can and held it over the opening. My fingers slowly loosened, but before I let go, I stopped. Questions I had buried for years suddenly came rushing back. I couldn't ignore them anymore. The next morning, I drove to the facility listed in the letter. The building looked ordinary, and the manager treated me politely after checking my identification and the paperwork. He led me down a narrow row of units and left me alone once I unlocked the door. I took a deep breath and rolled it open. I expected to find old furniture, maybe a few boxes of keepsakes. Instead, the unit was packed with filing boxes, legal papers, handwritten notebooks, and sealed envelopes arranged with surprising care. The first document I picked up contained information that made my heart race. Before I had read even a few pages, I realized this wasn't about old memories. It was evidence, and every page raised a new question about the life I thought I understood. I slowly went through every box inside the unit. The more I read, the harder it became to breathe. There were legal papers, medical records, and several handwritten notebooks that my mother had kept over the years. Each page seemed to answer one question while creating another. At first, I thought the papers were unrelated, but as I arranged them in order, a clear picture began to appear. It was nothing like the story I had believed for most of my life. One group of documents showed copies of insurance records from shortly after my dad's death. Attached to them were reports from experts who had examined signatures and handwritten notes. According to those reports, several important documents had been forged. The signatures that appeared to belong to my dad were fake. My mother had written page after page, explaining how she eventually learned that Garrick had created those false papers. He had made it look as though my dad had secretly changed his life insurance policy before he died, cutting me out entirely. My mother believed those lies because the documents looked real. As I continued reading, I found another painful discovery. There was a bundle of old letters tied together with string. Every one of them had been written by Uncle Reeve. He had sent letter after letter over the years asking my mother to let him tell his side, or at least give him a chance to speak with her. None of those letters had ever reached her. My mother explained that she found them hidden among Garrick's belongings many years later. He had kept them from both of us, making sure we remained separated. My chest felt tight as I imagined all the birthdays, holidays, and ordinary days that could have been different if even one letter had been delivered. The notebooks became more emotional as the years passed. My mother described the moment she first started noticing small lies that didn't match the facts. At first, she ignored them. Then more strange things happened and she began checking old records herself. Little by little, she realized she had been manipulated. By the time she understood the truth, I was already gone. She didn't know where I lived, and every attempt to find me seemed to fail. Instead of giving up, she quietly collected every piece of evidence she could find. She wrote that she hoped one day I would read everything with my own eyes because she knew I would never believe simple words after everything that had happened. I closed the final notebook and sat in complete silence. For years, I had carried nothing but anger toward my mother. Now that anger was changing direction. The person I blamed for destroying my childhood was no longer the only one responsible. My thoughts kept returning to Garrick. He hadn't just lied. He had carefully destroyed a family, stolen years that could never be replaced, and made sure the truth stayed hidden. For the first time, I realized that the greatest betrayal had come from someone who had smiled at me while quietly ruining my life. I could have closed the unit, driven home, and tried to forget everything again. Instead, I made a different choice. My mother had spent years collecting pieces of the truth, but I wanted to know the whole story. As a fraud litigator, I knew how to follow paper trails and find hidden patterns. I requested copies of the insurance filings listed in the documents and began comparing them with public records. It took many late nights, but the numbers slowly started telling their own story. Money had been redirected from my dad's estate for years. At first, the missing amounts were small enough to escape attention. Later, they became much larger. The transfers were hidden through fake beneficiary changes, forged consent forms, and accounts that should never have existed. Every trail led back to the same person. Garrick had been draining the estate while making it appear that a trustee handling the paperwork was responsible for the losses. I also discovered that Vesper had not been an innocent bystander. Her name appeared on several forms connected to shell accounts that existed only on paper. She had signed documents, approved transfers, and helped move money from one account to another. The evidence showed that she knew exactly what was happening. Together, they had built a system that allowed them to steal without attracting attention for many years. I contacted a few former associates whose names appeared in the records. Most of them had already retired or moved away. At first, they were nervous about talking. They had spent years believing nobody would listen to them. Once they learned who I was and saw the documents I carried, their fears slowly disappeared. One retired trustee admitted that he had always suspected something was wrong, but could never prove it. Another associate said she had been blamed for missing funds and lost her license because of accusations that were never true. Others shared similar stories. They had all been treated as if they were dishonest while the real thieves remained protected. Every conversation added another piece to the puzzle. The truth became impossible to deny. The lies had not lasted a few months or even a few years. They had continued for nearly 2 decades. As I reviewed everything together, I realized something that hit me harder than any document. I had spent most of my life wondering what was wrong with me. I believed I had failed as a daughter. Now the evidence showed something completely different. I had never been the problem. My childhood had been stolen by careful planning, endless lies, and people who cared more about money than family. The pain I carried for so many years had been built on a false story. Knowing the truth did not erase the past, but it gave me something I had never truly possessed before. It gave me certainty. And with certainty came the resolve to make sure everyone responsible finally faced the consequences of what they had done. I thought about driving straight to Garrick's house and demanding answers. I imagined asking him why he had destroyed so many lives. But after everything I had learned, I knew that anger would give me nothing. He had spent years creating lies. I wasn't going to make the mistake of fighting him with emotions. I decided to let facts speak for me. I organized every document, every filing, every witness statement, and every report into a complete timeline. I checked every detail more than once because I wanted the truth to be impossible to deny. When everything was ready, I turned the evidence over to the proper investigators. I answered every question they asked and gave them copies of everything I had found. After that, I waited. It wasn't easy. Legal investigations move slowly, but I knew rushing would only weaken the case. Weeks turned into months as examiners reviewed the filings and interviewed former associates. Eventually, the investigations confirmed what the documents had already shown. Civil lawsuits were filed against Garrick and everyone connected to the fraud. The missing money, the shell accounts, and the forged records were finally brought into the open. More evidence continued to appear as the investigation grew. People who had stayed silent for years were finally willing to tell the truth because they no longer feared being blamed. Garrick had spent years protecting his image. People in town believed he was steady, generous, and respectable. That image disappeared piece by piece as the facts became public. Every official report revealed another lie he had hidden for years. The reputation he had worked so hard to build collapsed under the weight of the evidence. Vesper also faced the results of her choices. The accounts connected to the fraud were investigated, and the money linked to them was frozen. Everything she had gained through dishonest actions was taken away. The comfortable life she had enjoyed disappeared because it had been built on stolen money. I never visited either of them. I never called them or wrote a letter. There were no angry speeches, no dramatic meetings, and no shouting. They already knew why everything was happening. My job was simply to make sure the truth reached the people who could act on it. Sitting quietly and watching justice move forward gave me a feeling I had never expected. It wasn't happiness because nothing could return the years I had lost. It wasn't excitement because too much damage had already been done. It was something calmer than that. It was peace. For the first time since I was 9 years old, I no longer felt powerless. I didn't need revenge through anger or revenge through pain. Watching every lie fall apart one by one was enough. The truth had waited a long time to be heard. But once it finally came into the light, nobody could bury it again. After everything that had happened, I felt there was one place I still needed to visit. I drove back to the house where I had spent the first years of my life. It looked smaller than I remembered. The paint had faded, the porch steps still sagged, and the garden my dad once loved was gone. I stood outside for several minutes before walking to the front door. Since the legal process had already started, I was allowed to enter the property. Every room brought back memories I had tried to forget. Some were happy while others were painful. I slowly walked through the house until I reached my mother's old bedroom. Inside a closet, I found a wooden box hidden on the top shelf. When I opened it, I froze. It was filled with photographs of me. There were pictures from school events, birthdays, and even my law school graduation. I had never seen anyone taking those pictures. Some showed me standing with classmates. Others captured moments when I was walking across a stage to receive awards. My mother had kept every photo carefully organized by year. None of them had been displayed anywhere. It was as if she had collected pieces of my life in secret. I sat on the floor holding those pictures, unable to understand why she had stayed hidden all those years. As I left the house later that afternoon, one of the elderly neighbors recognized me. She smiled sadly and asked if I was Sloan. When I said yes, she quietly told me something I never expected to hear. She said my mother had often come to my school events without letting anyone know. She would stand far away where nobody noticed her. She watched my middle school graduation, my high school graduation, and even my law school ceremony. According to her, she always left before anyone could speak to her. She remembered asking her once why she never walked over to congratulate me. Her answer was simple. She said she didn't believe she deserved to stand beside me after what she had done. Hearing those words hurt more than I expected. My mother had not forgotten me. She had been close enough to see important moments in my life, but too ashamed to take a single step toward me. I realized she had spent the rest of her life carrying guilt that never left her. She wanted to fix the past, but every year that passed made it harder for her to begin. As I drove away from the house for the last time, my emotions became impossible to separate. Part of me wanted to forgive her because I finally understood how deeply she had regretted her choices. Another part still grieved for the little girl who had needed her mother and never had her beside her. I didn't know if forgiveness would ever come completely. I only knew that the truth had changed the way I looked at the woman I had blamed for so many years. Many months after the investigation began, the legal process finally came to an end. I sat quietly inside the courtroom and listened as the judge explained the final decision. The evidence was clear and there was no room for doubt. The court ruled against Garrick. The filings, witness statements, and expert reports had proven exactly how the money had been diverted over the years. Everything he had worked so hard to hide had been uncovered. I didn't feel excited when I heard the decision. I simply felt that justice had finally reached a place where it had been missing for far too long. After the ruling, the process of recovering the stolen assets began. Properties, accounts, and other valuables connected to the fraud were collected and divided according to the law. Because I was Adele's only legal daughter, part of the recovered estate belonged to me. When my attorney explained how much I would receive, I stayed silent for a long time. The money was more than enough to change my life, but I already had everything I truly needed. A safe home, a steady career, and peace of mind were worth more to me than another account. Then I remembered something Uncle Reeve had often talked about during the years we lived together. He always wished there was a way to help kids who had been abandoned by their families. He believed those kids deserved the same chance he had tried to give me. He never had enough money to make that dream real, but he never stopped believing in it. I decided that the money should be used for something bigger than myself. I worked with lawyers and local community leaders to create a scholarship fund for young people who had been left without the support of their parents. The scholarships would help them pay for school and build a future they could be proud of. Every student who received help reminded me that pain did not have to be the end of someone's story. It could become the beginning of hope for someone else. A few days after everything was finished, I visited my mother's grave for the first time. I stood there quietly with fresh flowers in my hands. The wind moved gently through the trees as I looked at her name carved into the stone. I spoke to her as if she were standing beside me. I told her that nothing could erase the night she sent me away. Those years could never be returned and the hurt would always be part of my life. But I also told her that I no longer wanted to carry hatred inside my heart. I had spent too many years living with anger. I wasn't choosing to forget what happened. I was choosing not to let it decide the rest of my future. I placed the flowers beside her grave, took one last look, and walked away feeling lighter than I had in many years. As I look back on my life now, I often think about the 9-year-old girl who walked away from her home carrying a duffel bag